Hey everyone, welcome to Photography for Kids. This is one of our first lessons and I'm really excited to have you here. I think it's really important to start talking about photography in terms of the history of photography. And I don't want to bore you too long because I know how much most of you don't like history lessons, but I think it's really cool how the camera was invented and really how far it's come since it was invented. So you'll learn some cool fun facts from me, and hopefully you can share it with your family and friends, and you'll just know a little bit more about how photography came to be before we actually start going out and taking pictures. So get excited for that, but first, let's have a little history. So, the very first cameras were invented in the 1700s, and the first camera was called camera obscura, and it was actually used for drawing, and it's not like any of the cameras that we know today. As you can see in this picture, we have an artist drawing an image with a projection of what's outside, and he's basically in a large box, and he uses this pinhole, and the light passing through this pinhole shines upon the wall opposite of it, and it creates this reflection of, or this image of what's outside, but it's upside down. And so this is just how some artists started drawing back in the 1700s, and really crazy how this was invented. It was called camera obscura. Later in the 17th century, a lens and a mirror were attached, but it's still the same idea. So in this image we have where it says B, that's the lens, and that's pointing at whatever the artist wants to draw. And then M is where the mirror is, and so the image goes through B, and you can see the dotted line, and it bounces off M, and the mirror flips it, and so when it shines up through the glass panel, the artist can put a piece of paper or some sort of parchment on top of that and trace whatever the camera is looking at. So before they invented photography where you could print images, this is actually how people would do it. They would trace images. I don't think you would want to have to sit through your school photos if there was an artist sketching and tracing each one of you. That might take a few years. Alright, so really the fathers of modern photography are Joseph Niepce and Louis Daguerre. They were both French artists, and Niepce was, and I'm not exactly sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he created the first image actually that was printed on a piece of copper tin. Daguerre really made this popular, and he created a camera and a chemical process and really made it more accessible to print photographs on copper tins, and these were called daguerreotypes. And you can see this image of President Lincoln, one of the very first images of him, and it was a daguerreotype. And these French artists really were the founding fathers of the modern camera. So that is quite interesting. And this was in the early 1800s. William Talbot first invented paper photographs a little bit after that in the 1800s. He was an Englishman, and these images were just black and white images. So there was no color photography back then. It was just black and white, but William Talbot, he was able to actually print the photos on a chemically treated paper rather than the copper tins. Before photography became widestream, portraits were only for the rich. Portraits as in art, painted or hand-drawn portraits, because it was really expensive to have an artist come and basically draw you. Now, with photography, many people could enjoy the much cheaper portrait. New and better cameras with better lenses were invented with each decade. Decade after decade, in the late 1800s, more cameras were created, and you can see here the old type of camera. But these cameras were really slow, and some were even similar to a Polaroid picture, where they would have these plates of film that they would slide into the camera, similar to this one, and the cameraman, the operator, would click the shutter, click the camera, and it would take a few seconds for it to capture the image. Unlike our cameras now that take images in less than a second, or less than 1/100th of a second, images back then, it took a few seconds for it to actually be captured. But this made the photos almost automatic, and they were almost developed automatically, as the basically film was then just placed underwater, and the image would appear. But still, even before these cameras, it would take a really long time for the photo to actually be taken. And when people did portraits, because you wanted to stay really still, because if you moved your head a little bit, or if you blinked or had to scratch your nose, the photo would be messed up and it would be blurry. And so photographers actually had these head contraptions that you would attach to the back of your head, and it would hold up your head straight so that you wouldn't move a muscle. George Eastman was the first to invent the film roll, and now a lot of you kids probably don't even use film anymore, the actual film roll, but I'm sure your parents, when they were growing up, were using film. And this was the first film roll, and this led to the Eastman Kodak brand, which was one of the most popular film brands ever, and recently has dropped in popularity, but for most of the 20th century was the leading brand of photography. And some of you probably have never even heard of Kodak, but it was a very popular brand. Back in the early 1900s, early 20th century, there was no color photography available to the mainstream, and people used to actually paint in color to their black and white photos. So you see this example to the right of this image of these samurai warriors. It's half painted, and you see that the artist went in and painted the black and white film, or whatever it was printed out on, to give it color. Sergei Gorsky of Russia was commissioned to invent photography in the early 20th century. And he figured out a way that if you took 3 photographs with different filters, one with red, one with blue, and one with green, and then you combined them, they created a full color image. And you can see this one on the right. It's pretty amazing to think that this image was taken, all over 100 years ago, and the color is still, it's so amazing, and it's just as good as the color today. It might even be a little bit more vibrant than, the digital cameras of today. Throughout the 20th century, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, cameras became smaller and smaller and cheaper. People were taking photos all over the place. My dad was really into photography when he was younger. He had his own Canon camera that he still has today that shot film, and everyone had a camera. The first disposable camera was created by Fuji in 1986. These are the ones that you can grab at the drugstore and take your 24 pictures, and then take the camera back and get the images printed out. And actually, it's a misconception that it's a disposable camera, because Fuji really tries to recycle the cameras after you use them. So it's really a one-time use camera that they will recycle. Canon introduced the first digital camera in 1984. And here's Kodak's first portable electric camera, so similar to a digital camera, but this was actually in the late 70s, this image of this camera, but you can see it's almost like a computer, and it weighed a lot, and it's about as big as a stack of books. And you see it has this old cassette tape, recording something on the right hand side, and then underneath it's like a computer. not easy to carry around with you. And now cameras are everywhere. They're on your phone, in your car, in your rear view car camera thing. They're on your glasses if you have the new Google Glass, and they're really everywhere, and they're so cheap compared to how expensive they were when they were first invented. And so that is the basic history of the camera. Now you know where cameras came from, how they were invented, and you can share some of these fun facts with your family and friends. So thank you for watching this lesson. Next time we're going to talk a little bit more about how you use the camera, and after that we'll be starting our adventures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.